Hello and welcome to my review of the book Nudge. My name is Sebastian Sville, and this is for the Responsible Marketing course. So Nudge was written by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. Richard Thaler won the Nobel Peace Prize in Economics in 2017. Cass Sunstein worked in the White House as a policy advisor under the Obama administration from 2009 to 2012. So both very intelligent and influential people in the world of economic policy. That's what this book is about. It's about how to influence policy design, how to design policy and implement stuff through nudges. So, the premise of this book is that humans are often illogical. They do not follow what they call the econ mindset for the most part. And this comes down to the idea that thinking is hard. Thinking is a very energy-intensive process. You can look at it evolutionarily. Human brains did not grow and develop until we had access to cheap calories that we got from being able to use fire to cook things. And then even if you have two grandmasters sitting down to play chess for a whole day, they can just by thinking use upwards of 6,000 to 8,000 calories. So thinking is hard, and the body is often lazy. And so people will often fall into using heuristics, which are effectively thinking shortcuts that we learn. We can learn heuristics. And the book lists a number of kind of frameworks for how our brain will use these shortcuts. There are patterns in how they use them, and so by learning these heuristic patterns, the book proposes that you can design social systems that make the most of them in order to benefit society by increasing people's well-being. So the heuristics it mentions are things like anchoring, where you have a foundational idea that you're pulling from. Availability, which is what has been happening recently. Things that are more recent are more likely to influence your decision making. Representativeness is how similar the situation you're in is to something else you've previously seen before. Loss aversion means that people are more likely to try to prevent loss than they are to go for gains. Status quo bias means that in a similar aspect, you're kind of biased towards wanting to stay the same, like status quo. People will often try not to change and go with what they know. And then framing is how a situation is framed to a person, how they appraise the situation will affect their decision, which sounds like it's sensical, but it can be even using the same information. If you say something like 90% of people survive this disease, 90% is a high number, and so you might think, hey, it's not, this disease isn't too bad, I'll probably survive. But if you frame it the other way, where you say 10% of people die from this disease, 10% is also a pretty high number of people to be dying from the disease. So you might choose and interpret the risk in different ways based on how a question or situation is framed. And so you can design social systems and portray information in certain ways if you understand how these systems work. So Nudge is a self-declared defense of libertarian paternalism. It describes itself as soft paternalism. So paternalism is basically the idea that the state or government knows best, and so they will try to push you towards outcomes that it deems are good for you. And then libertarianism is kind of the opposite of that you should have the most free choice as possible. And so libertarian paternalism is the idea that you should still be able to make choices, but we're going to try to push you in a direction that we think are beneficial for society. And so it basically states that that it is possible through behavioral economics, and then that it is legitimate to influence people's behavior kind of on a macroscopic level, while respecting their freedom of choice. And it does this. It lists a bunch of. Most of the book is just examples of how to apply this to things like healthcare, education, social services, a lot of government kind of area stuff, and then how to improve these systems by allowing people to make more choices. And then the whole thing is a compromise between. It's a compromise on policy for those who think that people are both rational and irrational. So if you think people are rational and can make good choices, then they can opt out of the programs and they can make their own choices. Whereas if you think people are irrational, then the policies will help nudge them towards making beneficial choices. So there are some critiques of libertarian paternalism. I mean, the big one, it assumes that the government does know the best about what people's utility curves are, which is like what they want or what they need. If you don't necessarily have a government or a state in power that is benevolent, let's say, some of these policies could be abused. And if you're like, yes, you still have rational people who can make decisions and opt out of it. However, you still get the macroeconomic patterns of pushing people towards certain choices. There might also be biases in outcome. So if you are mostly trying to influence people who are in lower socioeconomic status stuff, and you're trying to push them towards certain outcomes, then you might end up with biases that can make you kind of question how certain policies affect certain people, and there might not be like one of the big issues in psychology is that it's mostly done on like white Anglo-Saxon rich people, like well educated. There's the WASP acronym, which is true. It's most of psychology experiments are done on like college level populations. There have been issues getting representation from even like across the gender line, like for female people. So when you're dealing with people of all socioeconomic statuses, making policy assumptions based on research that may not necessarily apply to them can be dangerous, and you have to be careful when you're designing stuff like that. It also assumes that people are good at design. When you get into a lot of the finicky parts of this, you're talking about kind of microcosm application of a lot of this design. So if you don't have experts designing them on like a very minute scale, well, the book does cite some situations where they don't necessarily have experts and they're still able to have positive outcomes. If you're talking about very specific like user interface design stuff, that requires expert knowledge, which may not be available in all cases, or might be prohibitively expensive. And it also does not guarantee microcosmic success. It doesn't account for abnormal psychology. In a lot of cases, like 2% of people are psychopaths. They lack the emotional connection between their synaptic synthesis areas, so that when you have usually emotionally charged words like love or baby, that would normally spark some sort of feeling or emotion inside of people. In psychopaths, it just goes straight through. So if you are relying on certain psychological factors, you aren't necessarily guaranteed to get like 100%, but you can often steer policy in the right direction. So yeah, that is it. The book was interesting. Would recommend reading it. It's I like I have a background in psychology and economics, and I found it pretty cool. Yeah, let me know what you think, and hope you have a great day. Cheers.